This is the approval process refresher. The main point of this training is going to be to remind everyone how to process both proposals and charters. Most of it's going to be at the conceptual level, the actual steps to go through to actually have something approved. And then at the end, I'll show you how to do a few things in ECOS, actually where to click. Because there have been some things that have changed with the new user interface, especially around charters. That process hasn't changed much, but where to click in order to start the process has. But first, let's start with just some conceptual issues. There's been some confusion over both the process and where to actually go in ECOS to do various parts of the process. So I want to talk about that first. So what you're processing determines how you process it in ECOS, and this distinction between an agreement with a donor and an agreement with an implementing partner is very important. There's basically two general types of things that you might be processing in ECOS. And yes, there are some exceptions, but we can talk about that on an individual basis. But in general, you're either going to be processing money in or money out. Money in is when we're asking another organization for money to do something. And that the documents that involves are, it starts with a proposal or a concept note. And if those are successful, it results in a funding agreement. So those are the things that you're getting approved when we're bringing money in. And it commits us to do certain things, to certain deliverables for the donor. And all of this process is handled on the funding in ECOS. There's an object, a tab in ECOS called funding, and every grant that we go after has a funding record in ECOS so that we can keep everything together related to our relationship with the donor and what we've told the donor that we're going to do, how much money they're giving us, all the documentation involved in that happens on the funding. And then on the other side, when we are granting money to implementing partners to do work, that's obviously we're sending money out. And those documents, the things that you would be approving in ECOS on that side are charters, which is an umbrella term for PAs, grant agreements, grant letters, cash pledges. And when we grant money out, it commits the implementing partner to certain deliverables. And all of this process occurs on the program project on the charter. So there's a thing called a charter, and that sits on the program or project in ECOS. The program or project is where we manage the implementation, all the work that's associated with actually doing what we've said we would do. So that's the distinction there, and there's two separate realms where you would process these various agreements. On the one side, if it's a funding, money coming in, it would be you'd be processing the proposal or the concept note and the funding agreement on the funding side of ECOS, on the funding object in ECOS. And if you are talking about granting money out, you'd be processing the PA, the grant agreement, the grant letter, cash pledge on the charter, which is located on the program project in ECOS. So I'm going to walk through the process at a conceptual level for what you do with proposals and funding agreements. So money coming in. That's much more complicated. Not much more complicated. It's more complicated. There's more steps involved. There's a few more things to remember. And I think people are less familiar with it, and there's a little more confusion around it. So the bulk of this will be looking at the money coming in. The charter process, money going out, hasn't changed much. The only thing that's really changed is the interface for how to do that. So the actual process pretty much stays the same, and I'll show you where to click in terms of so you can actually do that process. But the process itself hasn't changed. So let's jump right into money coming in. So there's a opportunity that you want to go after. Before you actually start anything, there's a couple questions that you should ask yourself. First of all, does this proposed project fit with ISD strategy? Is it in the country, one of the countries that we're going to be working in? In other words, is it likely to get the green light from David or leadership to even pursue the proposal? And then the second thing is it budget relieving? And this is something that you would want to determine before doing any work on a proposal and before putting it in ECOS. So if the answer to either of those questions is no, there's a good chance that it won't happen, and in that case you wouldn't want to go through the work of putting it in ECOS. But let's say that the answer to those questions is yes. How do you get started? Where do you start? So the very first thing to do, the minute that you know that you're in fact going to pursue this grant or this funding, is you would want to create a funding record in ECOS. This is just basic information about the project or about what you're planning, about the proposal. Obviously, at this stage, things could change. The proposal hasn't been developed yet. So when you're putting in things like start and end dates, the amount, some of these things may be notional at this time. But you want to do that right off the bat so that everyone understands that this is something that's being pursued. And we can run reports and we can see what the proposal pipeline looks like, and everyone can be informed. The next thing to do immediately after you create the funding record, you pretty much go right into adding members. And there are a few members that you're going to want to add. You should basically fill out all of the members, but I want to highlight a couple because they are very much involved in the approval process. The first is the program approver. This is the person on the program team that's going to basically give the stamp of approval that it's good to go from a programmatic perspective, good to submit to the donor from a programmatic perspective. The next role is the finance approver, who is going to be giving the stamp of approval from finance internally before it goes to the donor. And then two more roles that are maybe a little less straightforward. One is the project administration lead. This is the person who is going to be, who probably is the one creating the funding record and actually adding the members. It's the person who will be submitting, starting the the internal approval process. The person who's actually going to be clicking the button to say, yes, this is ready to go through internal approval. And it's the person who will sort of be following the proposal to make sure that it's making its way through the approval process and that all of the pieces are there and that it's a smooth process. And then the last role that I want to talk about is the donor liaison. And this is the person who would be interacting with the donor, who would actually be the one physically sending the proposal to the donor, receiving any feedback and coordinating that process. And there are two steps. Once in ECOS, once the proposal has been internally approved, that the donor liaison will be responsible for, and I'll get to those in a minute. The next thing to do after you add the members is to log the go decision. You had to make sure that the proposal was within the ISD strategy, and you had to submit it to, at this point, David, to say yes or no that we can pursue it. It's a good idea to write a note in the comment section of the funding, and again I'll show that when I get into ECOS, that just says, David gave go decision on 5/22/2016. The other thing is, if there's an email or some sort of confirmation that you have actually clearly stating that the go decision was received, it's a good idea also to save that in the miscellaneous folder in the documents section of the funding. That way you have it for reference in the future. After logging the go decision, you would, at this point, you can create the projects that will be associated with this funding and assign budgets to them. This is a new step, and not a new step necessarily, but a step that was done much later in the process before, and it can now be done right at the same time as all of this other stuff, creating the funding record, adding the members, basically setting up everything at the outset so that it's a smooth process moving forward. And I'll explain that as well, how to actually do that. But you're creating the projects, and then you're linking the projects to the budget, or sorry, the projects to the funding at this very early step, so that it's clear that this funding, if approved, will result in this project and even this agreement with the National Society, so that we can sort of see what we're getting ourselves into and what the project is going to actually look like. So once that's done, and you've got that set up, the last thing to set up to move this forward is the cover letter. And this is the document that's going to be accompanying the proposal documents through the system. It's what's going to let any approvers know what they need to approve, or if there's any notes or things that they need to know. That should be included in the cover letter, as much information as they need in order to facilitate their approval. It'll speed things up and it'll make the process go smoother. To note, there are places in the cover letter or in the text of the cover letter, you might write the start and end dates, or how much the proposal is for. It's really crucial that that always matches what's actually in the physical documents that people are reviewing, because if there's a disconnect there, it tends to slow things down. And remember, you're creating the cover letter at the very beginning of the process in order to get things moving. After the proposal is developed, some information may have changed, so you just need to make sure that the cover letter at all points matches reality, like what the actual proposal is. So you can update it, and you can update it up to the point of starting it on the internal approval process. So it should be open for you to edit while things are being created, while the proposal is being developed. So when you create the cover letter and you click save, you'll be taken to a screen immediately that will ask you if an official concept is required for this proposal. And if there is, then you would go through the concept process in ECOS, which is just a couple steps. It's essentially, it tells you to create the concept offline, upload it to ECOS, and click a button once you've sent it to the donor. And then once you have received word from the donor, there's another task that it'll give you to log that decision. Did the donor say yes or no? Obviously, sometimes it's not as simple as the donor saying yes or no to the concept. Often there's some back and forth. And at this stage, since the concept is a fairly informal process in ECOS, it's logged, but there aren't step-by-step actions that you have to take. It's best to handle this back and forth with the donor in the chatter feed, just noting that X has changed or Y has changed, or asking for other people's input via the chatter feed, and always making sure to upload the most recent version of the actual concept document in ECOS to make sure that everyone's working off the same document. So once you have either the concept done or you've skipped the concept, you do come to this offline proposal development stage. And basically you follow the guidance of your unit or your team to develop the proposal offline, bringing in everyone who needs to be involved, finance, tech people, if it's a federal proposal or another kind of proposal that is going to result in forms having to be filled out once it's complete, it's a good idea at this point to give BizOps the heads up that this is coming down the pike. And I say an offline proposal development, but you can manage this process in ECOS in the same way that you can write or manage the ANRE reporting process in ECOS. You basically can upload the proposal into ECOS. You can use the chatter feed on the document to go back and forth about different versions of the document. So that can be handled in ECOS. It's just there aren't official tasks or steps that will land in people's inboxes to do. But you do have the ability to manage the document creation process and document management and version management in ECOS. So as the project administration lead, you'll have received a task previously called Prepare Proposal Package for Approval. And at this point, now that the proposal is developed, you want to make sure that all of the annexes, everything related to the proposal that needs to be seen by any approvers is zipped together and everything is complete and up to date. And make sure that that is uploaded as the most recent version of the proposal in ECOS. If there are, for example, if there are forms that need to be filled out at the end of the process by BizOps, like if this is a federal proposal, you'll want to note that in the cover letter, or you could include placeholder annexes essentially to make it clear that the package is complete. It's just doing whatever you can to make sure that it's clear what's being asked of the approvers and what needs to be approved is useful. Often you may have 5 annexes in the final proposal that you're going to be sending to the donor, and maybe 2 of those are forms that you don't have at this stage right now. And so just noting that in the cover letter, or including placeholders for those documents in the package is useful. Also, just to note, before you click to submit the proposal for internal approval, you want to make sure that it's complete and things aren't going to change or aren't still in the process of changing. Obviously, things can change during the approval process, but it doesn't really do any good to click that button to start the internal approval process early. It won't save time if things are still being worked out. You want to make sure that you're really ready to go and when you click that button. So after you click that button, basically the proposal goes to the program management for approval. So the program approver is the person on the program team who has the final say or basically gives a stamp of approval that it's okay to go to the donor. This is supposed to be is meant to be someone in the field, either the country director or the regional director, depending on whether there is a country director or not. But it should involve someone from the field so that they understand what's going on and what's being proposed. At the same time that it goes to the program approver, it also goes to the financial analyst as sort of a separate parallel task to do a budget check. And this is to make sure that finance, when it goes to the finance approver, that person knows that the financial analyst has been involved and certifies that the budget is the one that everyone agrees on and has been worked on by the financial analyst. So this is actually not a step that causes the process to stop. However, it won't hold up the process if they don't do the check, at least the process in ECOS. But when it gets to the finance approver is going to want to make sure that they have seen that the financial analyst has been involved. So just want to make sure that it's understood that there is this other task. You may hear about it, and it's the financial analyst has that responsibility to check a box that says the budget is correct. Also, at this point, if it is a federal proposal and a 424A form needs to be filled out, this is this point where the financial analyst would also do that, and they would then save it into the zip file, into the proposal package. So that's where that happens. So once the program approver has approved, and on the side the financial analyst has clicked the button that says that the budget is okay, then it goes to the finance approver, who looks at it, approves it, and then it comes to the part where the donor liaison gets involved. And I want to spend a few minutes talking about what happens there. The donor liaison is given a task that says to prepare the package for donor submission. And at this stage, this is where, if there are forms to be filled out or there's anything else to be done prior to submitting the package to the donor, this is where that should occur. So if there are forms to be filled out, it would be going to BizOps at this point, getting those forms and rolling them back into the proposal package, zipping everything together, making sure that everything in the most recent version of the proposal package that's in ECOS is accurate and correct and up to date, and is the most current version of that particular document. So all the annexes are the most up to date, the budget is the most up to date, and the narrative, anything that's in there. And once that's completely done, you can submit it to the donor. Now, during the course of the internal approval, it's possible that maybe something has changed in the proposal, and if there are changes to the total budget line, the starter end dates, or the cost share, that would require a new cover letter to be done. And we're working on making this a very simple process, and in a couple of months that you'll just be able to push restart approval process, and it'll just take it back to the beginning, which is only 2 steps, and you would have the ability to change the cover letter and update the start and end dates or whatever, and move that through. Currently, you would just have to, essentially, you're just cutting and pasting from the old cover letter and starting a new cover letter. If any of those things change, again, it's the total budget line, the starter end dates, and the cost share. If there's anything else that's changing, if you're talking about small programmatic changes or changes within budget lines, that doesn't need a new cover letter, but you do want to keep track of that, and you do want to get any approvals that need to be had in order to make those changes. But that can be handled in the chatter feed on the program. Sorry, on the proposal. So when you're to the point of you're completely ready to send it to the donor, it's been approved, and everything's been approved by everyone, and that's been logged on the cover letter, you, the donor liaison, would click Submit to Donor. And then you wait for the donor to get back to you. And when they do get back to you, you get a task that says, basically, what did the donor say? Was it a yes or a no? Again, often it's not as simple as that, and there are issues letters, or there are changes, emails back and forth with the donor. Again, the same thing applies as applied to the internal approval process. If any of the changes result in a change in the total budget line, the starter end dates, or the cost share, you would just create a new cover letter and send it through the process again. Obviously, it would be much quicker this time around because everyone has seen it, and you would submit it again to the donor, and you would wait, and you would have the back and forth. And if any of the changes result in a change in the total budget line, the starter end dates, or the cost share, that you would just create a new cover letter and send it through the process again. Obviously, it would be much quicker this time around because everyone has seen it, and you would wait, and you would have the back and forth. and you would always update. You would always upload the most recent version of the proposal package reflecting all the changes, including all the annexes, all the budgets, everything kept together in one proposal package. Every time something changes, that proposal package should reflect that change, and every piece of it should be the most up-to-date piece of it. If you're going back and forth with the donor and the only things that are changing are programmatic or movements within budget lines, things that don't affect the total budget or the start and end dates or the cost share, then that can be handled on the chatter feed just as it was in the internal approval process. Again, it's just really important to log everything and make sure that any changes are reflected in the documents and in the proposal package that's uploaded in ECOS. So once you actually get the donor's final approval, the proposal has been approved. No, but that's not the end of the line, because when the donor approves something, you receive a funding agreement, and that has to be processed as well. There's no separate flow for that. There's no separate approval process. The process that you're currently in just continues, but there's one crucial thing that you have to do at this point. Once you receive the funding agreement, you need to upload it into ECOS, because at this point, that's what's going to be looked at in the next step, which is BizOps processing the agreement. The proposal at this point is done, but the funding agreement is what is being processed now. So you must upload it and upload all the pieces to it. If it's more than one document, it should be zipped together. And there's a place right on the approval user interface that where you can do that. It's a very clear place where you can upload the funding agreement. So that's the crucial step at this point. And after you upload the funding agreement, you'll click that yes, the donor has approved. You've uploaded the funding agreement. Then it will go to BizOps to process the agreement. And after all the signatures have been logged, you will and BizOps has uploaded the fully executed agreement. There is a final task that goes to the financial analyst, who confirms that the budget allocations you made way back here at the beginning when you created the projects and assigned the budgets, they confirm or update those if those are not correct anymore, those allocations, and then that's what officially moves the project into implementation and pushes the money from the funding to those projects. And then you have the funding completely approved, and your project is in phase 2, where you're now doing the charter, and you're ready to do the charter at this point. Now, just a quick note that throughout this whole process, you may have started to get the charter ready to process. And that's fine. There's nothing that's going to stop you in the system from doing that. So there may be a bit of overlap in terms of time, towards the end of this process when you have the money. You can obviously get started on the charter. You just can't complete it until the money has been, the funding agreement's been approved and all the money's been accounted for. So let's jump into the charter process then. And again, this is not really changed. So I'll go through it rather quickly. But first thing you do is you create the charter and then the cover letter, and you prepare the charter package for review, zipping it all together and uploading it into ECOS. Once that's all done, it goes to the program management for approval. And for charters, that's generally the program manager is the program approver. But there's guidance in ECOS on the member page where it tells you which members to assign to which roles, or which people to assign to which roles. After the program management, it goes to the financial analyst for approval. Then it goes to BizOps to facilitate the SME review and the signatures, and the SME process includes ISF management and finance management. And then once all the signatures have been approved and the partner approves, it's a fully executed agreement. So that's the process there. Again, pretty straightforward, and it hasn't changed. Again, what has changed is where the buttons are to do that, and I'll get to that in a second. But just really quickly, I just want to reemphasize that throughout the process, a new cover letter is needed if start or end dates change, the total budget amount changes, the cost share amount changes, and then all other changes can be handled via the chatter feed. So just reemphasizing that one more time. And then a couple quick tips to avoid delays in the process. Make sure that all the key information, dates, dollar amounts, always matches across the cover letter and the proposal document, or the concept document, or the funding agreement. Basically, you want to make sure everything, the cover letter, documents, and the program or project or the funding in ECOS all match up, and that there's not discrepancies there, because that could lead to questions and just delay the process. And again, just each version of whatever package you're approving should be complete and up to date at all stages, so that when someone goes in to look at it, they're looking at the most recent proposal package. It has the most recent budget in it. It has the most recent budget narrative in it. So that's just really important to make sure that it all kind of hangs together. And that's the project administration lead is the person who probably is going to be in there making sure that everything is good. But it's everyone's responsibility to make sure that the versioning of these documents stays up to date. And then also just clearly stating in the cover letter what needs to be done. If forms are needed, if there's anything that needs to be explained about why certain decisions were made, regarding the budget or regarding the end dates or anything programmatic, just make sure to include that in the cover letter to allow the approvers to understand and not have to go back and ask questions and delay the process. And then lastly, for USG proposals, there's just a few changes I want to go over really quickly. For USG proposals, it used to be that Alex Montgomery was the finance approver. Now it's Astrid. So make sure that, and the guidance has been changed in ECOS, but just want to emphasize it here as well, that Astrid should be the person who is the finance approver for USG proposals. Also want to note that there's some more potential changes to the process that may be coming from the corporate side of things. So that we'll let you know about those as things get worked out. There's also some improvements to ECOS that are coming to the process. So those two things combined make it such that it's going to be necessary for us to do these refreshers on a more regular basis, potentially like once a quarter or maybe once every couple months. So we'll be doing these much more regularly so that everyone can stay up to date on how to get their stuff approved. There will come a time at the end of the calendar year, end of 2016, where ECOS will stop changing and there won't be any improvements. And so things will stabilize a little bit then. And at that point, hopefully, we'll determine at that point how often we need to do these refreshers. So let me jump into ECOS now and show you where to click in order to get get things started, and I want to show you a few things with the interface. So I want to start with charters because while the process hasn't changed, the look of it has, and I want to make sure everyone understands where to how to get their charter started. So I'm in the test site, and I'm just going to add a charter to a already existing project. So I have my my project here, and I want to add. I want to start the charter. Like, what do I do? This is a completely new interface. All the buttons that you normally would see up here are not here. Because this is an agreement, and everything related to agreements and processing agreements now takes place on the Agreements tab. That's where I want to click. And since there's a few ways to get to the charter, you can sort of just scroll down and you can see that there's a place called Charter and Related Amendments. Or if I want to, I can click the Go To, and there's a Charter and Amendments, and it'll drop me down the page to that place. Then you can see there's a button called New Charter, so that's what I would click. And there's now, you'll see that there's a description that you can add to the charter. You didn't always, this field wasn't there before. It used to just be a number, and there still is that unique number, like charter 005137. That'll still be generated, but we found that it's a little bit difficult to differentiate between charters sometimes if there's not a description. So there's an optional field to add a description here. You would fill out the organization, which in the case of the charter, this is money going out. This is the organization we are giving the money to. Then you would click charter start date. You would add that. There's a place for the end date. Any comments? This is more for when the charter is being processed. If you want to, make a note as to why it's stuck in a certain stage for X number of days, or there's something going on that's stalling it, you can write comments in there to let people know kind of where things are at. But at this point, you really just need to fill out the required fields. So this is where you would put the type, whether it's a project agreement, a grant agreement, etc. This is the reporting frequency. Now currently, there's just one reporting frequency field. So if you have a situation where the frequency of your narrative reports differs from the frequency of your financial reports, you would just choose the most frequent between those two and let the Ecos team know, and we would get rid of the ones that aren't the auto-generated folders that aren't necessary. In the future, there's going to be two reporting frequency fields where you can set the narrative reporting frequency and the financial reporting frequency separately. Then you would add the amount committed and the currency. And so that's what you would do to start the charter. Once you have the charter created, you would need a cover letter for it to start the process, and the cover letter is now directly below the charter. You would just click New Cover Letter, or if you're starting at the top of the page, you can click Go To Cover Letters, and it will take you to the same place. So you would click on New Cover Letter. Make sure that you say that it's that you note that it's a charter. You click Continue. And you would fill out the required fields, noting in the description all the things that need to be noted in order for approvers to understand what they're doing with it. So that's and then again, once you start the cover letter, the process is the same as you are probably used to. The various approvers and when it involves the project administration lead, that they will also receive tasks in their inbox to do the various things that move the process forward. I want to show you what those tasks will look like, because the user interface is basically has everything in one place. So you would get a task, and there's always going to be guidance text here to tell you what to do. There's always going to be a green and often a red button here for you to choose, basically either submit or approve or kind of end it. There, if you scroll down the page, there's information about the flow. Basically, you'll see what the previous action was and what the current action is and where it's going next. Once you click, in this case, submit, you can see where it goes next. Then there's details of the in this case, the charter, and then you get to the documents, and this is where, when you receive this task as the project administration lead, you can upload the document or the zip file by clicking select file, and it'll bring up all of the things to choose from. And likewise, when someone is approving it and they want to see it, they would click view, and it would bring up the most recent version of that file that's been uploaded. And so here you see that there are no versions uploaded at this point. If there was one, you would see a 1 there, and when you click this, it would bring up that version. If there's multiple versions, like if there's 3 versions, you would see a 3 here, and it would bring up the most recent version. There's also a place here, and if this weren't at the very beginning, you would see a number of actions here. You would see that, X person took this action on this date, and you would have a full kind of trail of who's approved. There's also a chatter feed here that you can use to communicate about the approval. So that will show up, here. And if there was a conversation there, that whole conversation would show up in this area here. So that's about it for charters. Let's look at the proposal process too. Just a few things I want to point out about proposals. The most important thing, again, is that you would go to the funding to do that. So if you have a new proposal, you have to say whether it's a restricted grant or restricted general or unrestricted. Mostly you're going to be doing restricted grants. This means that we're asking another organization for money, and we're going to have constraints on the time, scope, and budget. The restricted general mostly refers to our recovery programs, where we receive money from donors, often the public, that is meant to be used in a certain place, but doesn't have a time frame on it and doesn't have scope attached to it. And unrestricted just means the funds are unrestricted. Probably won't be using that very often anymore. So you would continue. And you would fill out very basic information about the opportunity that you are going after. You give it a name, you note your business unit, you choose an organization that you're asking for money from. So remember, if you don't find OFTA, you can use the asterisk, and you generally will find it that way. Then you put in your nominal start and end dates, your notional start and end dates, and that's all that you're required to do now. You can put a little summary of it, and you can fill out the grant lead, any technical leads, the lead writer. The other thing that you really need to fill out at this point is the funding amount. And this is what you're proposing to ask for. You click save. You'll see that it's saved. Actually, what I should do is click save and close. because now I need to add members. Again, there are instructions up here about who to put a slot in these various places. I'm going to just put myself for everything in this example. Yeah, I would, at this point too, I would log the go decision, and to do that, I would edit it again. I would go into comments and say, receive green light from David on, and save and close that so that people know that we're good to go. If I have the documentation for that green light, I would go to the document section under miscellaneous. I would create a versioned document. I would call it something like this. I would save that. And then on this screen, I would upload it by choosing the file. So I'm going to go. So as I mentioned earlier, this is the point where you would create the projects that are associated with this funding. So I'm just going to really quickly show you how to do that. It will involve the new user interface. So what you would do is you would leave the funding, and you would go to Programs Projects. You would click New. And then it's your typical setting up a program or project. Nothing actually changes on the user interface until you get to the very end. So you would just create, as you've always created a program or project. You would give it a name. And fill out all the appropriate information. You would obviously fill out everything that was pertinent, but I'm going to just fill out the required fields in the interest of time. I'm going to choose myself as the leads. And so I've created this project. And now I'm going to go in, I'm going to go back to the funding once it saves. And you'll see that it brings you, once the project saves, to the new user interface. But right now, like I said, I'm going to go back to the funding, and I am going to, at this point, say, of this $200,000 that I'm proposing that, in this case, all of it is going to go to the project that I just set up. But you may have an Anne Ray grant, for instance, or another kind of grant too, where you're asking for $1 million and 200,000 is going to this project, and 200,000 is going to that project, etc. And this is the point where you want to just map it out, essentially, before it's approved. And as you'll see when I go to edit it, there's a proposed status now for these budgets. So this is my funding again. I'm going to come down here to the allocation section, and remember that this first one is if you have a program with child projects, that's where you would allocate, that's where you would click to allocate money to that. But in this case, I'm just doing a standalone project, so I'm going to come down here to just the Add Project Budget button and click that. I'm going to search for the project that I just created. So I'm saying that this is the project that's going to be funded by this funding, and the full amount of the funding is going to the project. You can choose if it's just budget for one fiscal year. You can choose that here. Now the AP code is required, but you may not know what the AP code is because the proposal hasn't been approved, so the AP may not even be set up at this point. If that's the case, you can just use this AP code 0000, the unspecified one, and then obviously you would go back later when you do know the AP code, or finance would do that. There is that final step at the end of the funding approval process where finance is going in and certifying that this part that we're doing right here is correct, and at that point they would catch this, the AP code is not correct, and they would change that. And you'll see here that right now when we're saying that 200,000 is going from this funding to this project, that's what we propose. The status is proposed, and it'll just stay proposed until the end of the approval flow. And at the point when it gets to the end of the approval flow and finance has that task at the end to certify everything, they will switch it to approved, and that will push the money to the project. So currently it's just proposed, so I click save, and you'll see that now this funding is now linked to this project. Now if we go to the project, and I'm going to refresh the screen, you're actually not going to see a budget on the project yet because of course it hasn't been approved yet. So there is no approved budget. But what you will notice is that when you go to the agreements tab, you'll be able to see that what funding is proposed to fund this project. So you can see that under the fundings part of the agreements tab. So that's kind of the step. You're doing this at the beginning of the process. You're linking everything together so that at the end of the process it's all linked together and everything. You don't have to go back and create the project in the middle of trying to get the PA signed, which you would have to do in order to get the PA signed. So that is kind of the last step before doing the cover letter for the funding. And then from there, the cover letter is relatively straightforward. It's the same interface as on the charter side. You would just make sure that you note that it is a cover letter of type funding proposal. And again, you just fill it out. And once you hit save, you would get a task in your inbox, you being the project administration lead. And from there, you would just click on that and you're taken through guidance screens on how to do it. And again, I'll just show you what that interface looks like for the funding. So you're going to come into your task inbox and you're going to find the task that you're looking for related to the funding that you've just created. And again, this is just an example, so this doesn't match what I was previously doing, but this is what the interface looks like. Very much like the charter approval interface. So you would, if this is actually the last step in the process, but if it weren't, you would see guidance text here telling you exactly what to do. You would see the action would take place here. There'd be there'd always be a green button and sometimes a red button. And again, you have all the details about the funding, and you have a document section. So with both the funding proposal and the concept, you can directly just upload them from this page. You can click select file, and you would, in the case of the funding proposal, you would upload a zip file with everything in it. And then likewise, the approvers would be able to view that most recently uploaded version by clicking view. For the funding agreement, you can click on funding agreement, and this will take you to the funding agreement folder. This is sort of the interface you are probably used to, and you would create a versioned document, and you would call it, in the case of an OFTA grant, you would probably it's probably a good idea to give it its its name. I forget how these go, but they're like the actual grant number. If it's another type of award, you just come up with the name that makes sense for what you're doing. And then on the next page, that's where you actually upload it. So jumping back, there's also a link to the donor communications folder in case there are official communications back and forth between you and the donor that you want to keep. It's highly recommended to keep all that in ECOS so that it's not floating around in people's emails. So that link is here for your convenience to do that. And then the bottom of the page, you're going to see the full list of who has taken action on this funding. So you'll see how it started, and each person and how long ago they did their action. And lastly, there's a chatter feed down here where you can store conversations about this approval. So during the part where the donor may be coming back and asking you to change certain things, again, if they're programmatic and they don't affect the total budget, the start and end dates, or the cost share, then you can communicate among your team using the chatter feed to address those, always at the same time going up and uploading the newest version of the budget or the funding agreement, depending on what part of the process you're on. So that concludes the approval refresher. As always, if you have any questions, please get in contact with the ECOS team. Again, we're going to be doing these more often as things change and as the system changes a bit to make it easier. So thank you very much for listening. We'll see you later.